South Africa's taxpayers continue to raise the most revenue for the government's tight fiscus. For the 2024-2025 term, personal income tax will contribute 738 billion rand to collections made by the South African Revenue Services. However, the country's thin tax base was unable to lift revenue collections to the record numbers we've seen in the past 2 years. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced a revenue shortfall of 56 billion rand when he delivered the country's budget this week. Joining me now to crunch the tax numbers is SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter. Now, Commissioner, looking at the past tax year and looking at how tough a year it was in terms of revenue collection, a 56 billion rand shortfall, why was it harder to collect revenues this past tax season?
Thank you, Teo. So what one has to understand is that when times are tough, and generally times are tough during economic downturns, and we have been in a slump for a long time, people struggle more generally. They have to make their rands cover a wider area. And so people generally are short of money, they're cash constrained. Within an inflationary environment, everything costs more. And if your salaries aren't keeping up to date or your profits from businesses aren't keeping up to date, then you look for areas where you can save money. And in that regard, often tax is a soft target. And so what we find is there's an inverse correlation between a buoyant economy. It is easier to collect taxes, regardless of the levels of profitability. It's just so much easier because people are in a different psychological frame of mind. Whereas in a tight time, people tend to hold on, they tend to hoard, they tend to fiddle with their taxes. And so we have to work so much harder during an economic downturn to collect at the same level that is required by government.
Then Minister Enoch Godongwana and his Treasury team left personal income tax brackets unchanged to alleviate the pressure that you're talking about from consumers. But some analysts say without an inflation adjustment from Treasury, consumers will essentially feel the pain in any case through a bracket creep. Should the personal income taxpayers be, getting a raise this year, maybe by 5% or adjusted to inflation from their own workplaces, they'll still be paying higher taxes.
Well, I mean, a budget is a balance between income and expenditure, and an incontrovertible reality is that the minister has to find the money to cover the expenses, and we know that we can only go so far with debt because we have at the moment spending 20 cents in every rand that we collect is going just to service debt, and so we can't continue to grow our debt book, we can't continue to grow debt service cost. And so the one issue the minister did was obviously to draw down on the gold and foreign exchange reserve fund from the Reserve Bank. We know how that is unfolding. And the second area is to look for other areas. I think the minister's approach was prudent because he could have hiked taxes. He could have slanted towards a very populist view for wealth taxes. He could have gone to companies and increase the statutory tax rates. But he didn't do any of that. He avoided the populist approach. And so what he did was an across-the-board measure that has minimum impact on everyone by not adjusting for for inflation. And I think that then takes a little bit of pressure off the fiscal balance, and in the medium term, he has also penciled in 8 billion for the global minimum tax. So I think it is, a budget is a mix between art and science, and I think the minister, to his credit, found the right balance.
Then, Commissioner, the tax revenues make up over 90% of government's consolidated budget revenue. That's a lot of pressure on you and your team at SARS to deliver the funds needed for the country's fiscus. Do you think the revenue service is adequately resourced? Did you listen to the budget thinking maybe I could do with $1 billion or $2 billion?
Of course I can do with $1 billion or $2 billion more, always. But we also can take be encouraged by the progress we have already made. And what many of the observers may not realize is that if we did not have a improving revenue administration, if we did not have a revenue administration at this level of efficacy, our fiscal situation would just be so much worse. Let me give you a few examples of where the efforts of SARS are supplementing the shortfall of revenue that is coming from the economy. We have a growing debt book. Our debt book in South Africa, and I'm talking of debt that is not under dispute, is over 300 billion rand. That's money that is owed to South Africa, but people are just not paying for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. Well, that requires a concerted effort using data science and analytics to identify those who owe debt to SARS, and then it requires a concerted effort of individuals. We have about 750 people who work in our debt recovery division, and they have in the past year resolved over 2 million cases, and that would mean a phone call, it would mean a letter, a final letter of demand, it would mean a civil judgment that we issue, and the instruments become tougher and tougher. But just resolving 2 million cases this year would have added 70 billion rand into the coffers that would not have been there. Another area where we do a lot of data science and machine learning AI is in the area of refund fraud risk detection. Sadly, the refund kitty is seen by many South Africans as a way of accessing funds. And whether it is just someone trying to overstate their deductions or hide certain incomes, we also find fraudulent attempts, specifically in the VAT area. We would not be able to do that if we did manual assessment. So we've worked hard to automate our online platform to receive all of our refunds, or rather our returns electronically, and then to use data science to analyze every single return. This year to date, that would mean we have worked through 14 million returns. Our risk detection capability and AI have highlighted 1.5 million that is high risk. Then a group of about 600 people work through those returns. They follow up with taxpayers. They get additional information. Just that piece of work have meant that we could contain 67 billion rand, which would otherwise have flown out in refunds. And so I can add to you the pockets of efficiency and improvement in SARS that collectively this year have added 210 billion rand into the fiscus, which would not have been there if you did not have an effective SARS.
Excise taxes, those sin taxes, are a column that we often look at when there is a budget, whether the price of beer will be going up or the price of smoke or a pack of smokes will be going up. Have you engaged those industries in terms of the changes in taxes that you've implicated? Because we've heard from the brewing industry that beverage volumes have gone down because the price of beer is too high for an under-pressure consumer. But also in the cigarette industry, there's been a lot of, underhanded work in the black market of selling of cigarettes, and that's where you're mixing the tax revenues.
Mateo, and that's actually the real risk. It's not the level of excise. We find that there is a lot of price elasticity in tobacco consumption as well as in alcohol consumption. When our favorite team wins, we drink to celebrate. When our favorite team loses, we drink to drown our sorrows. So, unfortunately, the real challenge is that we have found a significant ingress, a proliferation of illicit tobacco and illicit alcohol into our market. And that is sad. We've seen during COVID, when the official sale of these products were banned by government, we saw these illicit traders embedding themselves in the market. They offer cheaper prices because they don't pay taxes, and customers have now become used to that, and it's hard to wean them off that. That is the real issue. We have a focused stream of work. You've read in the newspaper our success in one particular one particular tobacco syndicate.
Yeah.
We've had a significant level of success there. We continue to do that work. This year so far, we've raised 10 billion rand of assessments in that regard and have already recovered 4 billion of rand. But we are not doing way enough. We have so much more work. Our total basket of work in the illicit trade, as well as state capture related cases, have yielded 14 billion rand just this year. That is more than double what we collected last year. We've also currently have about 250 cases that relates to state capture that is currently in progress. 27 cases have already been completed, and we have raised an assessment of 1.5 billion rand, and we've handed 32 cases over to the NPA. So there's a lot of work happening, but to your earlier point, we are way, way below what we can do, and that's a function of funding constraints under which we operate.
You're also introducing as SARS, implementing the global minimum corporate tax that will bring more business operations into the tax net. This will, of course, subject multinational companies to an effective tax rate of at least 15%. Do you think this makes us less competitive compared to other tax havens, if you will, around the world?
But it actually levels the playing field, because the reason why the OECD countries work together towards establishing what is known as an inclusive framework is because of two phenomena. The one is a more recent phenomena. When I say recent, in the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen an increase in the growth of the digitalization of economies and of business models, which means that a company is physically located in country A, but is economically present in countries B, C, D, E, up to Z. Let's take some examples. An Amazon, a Google, would be domiciled in America, but they actually recover their income and therefore their profits from countries around the world. And traditionally, the nexus, the principle that determines taxing rights for a country, is physical presence. The OECD Inclusive Framework has redefined taxing rights by saying when a country is economically active in another country, when a company is economically active, then that country also deserves some of the taxes. So that's the one area that is being addressed by this new framework. And the other area that is being addressed is a longer standing problem, which is companies engaging in aggressive tax planning, which results in the erosion of tax base and therefore shifts profits from one area to another area, and typically from a higher paying jurisdiction to a lower paying jurisdiction, and there's the abuse of transfer pricing laws and the like.
And do we have the capacity to deal with those as SARS in South Africa, those companies that are aggressively using their own budgets to make sure they don't have to pay as much in terms of taxes?
We can always do more, but at the moment, with our current capacity, we have completed 22 base erosion and transfer pricing audits within our large and international business division. And that includes companies that are internationally domiciled, based in South Africa but internationally active. Through that, we've raised the assessment of over 33 billion rand, and so far we've also collected almost 1.5 billion rand. That work will continue, and again, it's a function of employing data science to detect them, and then technical skills. Transfer pricing audits, auditors and specialists are often as scarce as hen's teeth. So we continue doing this work. What the global minimum tax will do, it will allow us, for companies who, because of aggressive planning, have managed to bring their effective tax rate to below 15%, government will be able to apply a top-up tax to say that you will pay a minimum of tax on 15%. And so that applies to companies that are active in South Africa. We will be able to include global profits beyond up to the level of 15% so that we get a fairer share of that taxes. And then also, as I said, the other issue is companies who are domiciled elsewhere but earn profits from us. We are able to include some of their profits, and therefore that will also include. So actually, what the inclusive framework, including the minimum top-up tax, introduces is a playing field that is so much more level.
And Commissioner, just before I let you go, allow me to be ambitious in terms of those personal income taxes. Was there any room for a cut? I know we have a thin tax base, but did you ever consider that ahead of the budget?
Well, first of all, I don't consider tax rates. That's the preserve of the Minister, working in conjunction with Treasury. But I want to just give you the signal that both the current and the recent former Ministers of Finance have given. And they demonstrated this in corporate income taxes, that they want to decrease our rate. It was 28%. They decreased it now to 27%. And their ambition is to say, over time, we're going to lower that to the OECD norms. But the quid pro quo for that is that we must broaden the tax base so that we have more companies paying at the level where they ought to be paying, rather than fewer companies paying at a higher level.
All right. Thank you very much, Commissioner. We have unfortunately run out of time. Thank you so much for your time in explaining the different tax changes that have come with this week's budget. That was, of course, Commissioner Edward Kieswetter from SARS.